The cold February wind cut through the snow-laden pines along Route 112, carrying with it the kind of silence that only exists in the deepest corners of rural New Hampshire. It was the evening of February 9th, 2004, and 21-year-old Maura Murray had just made what would become one of the most puzzling decisions in modern American missing persons cases. Her black 1996 Saturn sedan sat motionless against a cluster of trees, steam rising from its crumpled hood into the bitter night air, while somewhere in the darkness beyond, a young woman had simply vanished without a trace. The mystery began hours earlier, approximately 140 miles south in Amherst, Massachusetts, where Maura was completing her junior year in the nursing program at the University of Massachusetts. She was the kind of student who turned in assignments at 3:22 in the morning, the kind who balanced academic excellence with track and field athletics, the kind who seemed to have her life mapped out with the precision of a military operation. But that Monday afternoon, something changed, something that would transform a dedicated nursing student into the center of one of New England's most enduring mysteries. Before we dive deeper into this haunting tale, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue investigating these important stories that deserve to be told. The day started like any other for Maura Murray. After submitting her coursework in the early morning hours, she spent time online searching for directions to Vermont. By 1:20 p.m., she was making a series of phone calls and sending emails that would later puzzle investigators for decades. She contacted her professors and work supervisor with a fabricated story about a death in the family, claiming she needed to take a week off from her studies. Her family would later confirm that no such death had occurred, leaving everyone to wonder why a seemingly stable young woman would craft such an elaborate lie. The afternoon hours revealed a pattern of behavior that suggested careful planning mixed with inexplicable urgency. Maura packed her belongings with the methodical approach of someone preparing for an extended journey. She gathered clothing, school textbooks, toiletries, and workout gear, loading everything into her Saturn sedan. At 3:30 p.m., she left the UMass Amherst campus, driving toward an uncertain destination that she had shared with no one, not her family, not her friends, not her boyfriend, who was stationed at Fort Sill in Oklahoma with the Army. Her first stop was an ATM, where she withdrew $280 at 3:40 p.m. The security cameras captured her alone, moving with apparent purpose, but giving no indication of distress or fear. From there, she drove to a nearby liquor store, where she purchased $40 worth of alcohol, including vodka, Kahlua, Bailey's Irish Cream, and a box of Francia wine. She also returned 79 empty cans for recycling, collecting a few additional dollars. The store's surveillance footage would later become crucial evidence, showing Maura conducting these transactions alone, appearing calm and collected despite whatever internal turmoil might have been driving her mysterious journey north. During this time, she also picked up accident report forms that she needed to complete for an insurance claim. Just 2 days earlier, on February 7th, she had been involved in a minor accident while driving her father's car. The mundane task of handling insurance paperwork seemed oddly juxtaposed with whatever urgent mission had compelled her to abandon her studies and drive toward the White Mountains of New Hampshire. At 4:37 p.m., Maura checked her voicemail for the final time. Her cell phone records would later show that this was the last activity on her device, the last electronic breadcrumb in a trail that would soon go completely cold. As the afternoon sunlight began to fade over the Massachusetts landscape, Maura Murray was driving north on Interstate 91, heading toward a confrontation with fate along one of New Hampshire's most isolated stretches of highway. The drive from Amherst to the White Mountains region of New Hampshire takes approximately 3 hours under normal conditions. As Maura's Saturn sedan climbed through the rolling hills and dense forests that separate Massachusetts from its northern neighbor, the temperature was dropping, and patches of ice were beginning to form on the less traveled roads. Route 112, where her journey would come to an abrupt end, is known locally as a treacherous stretch of pavement that winds through some of the most remote terrain in New England. The residents of this sparsely populated area are accustomed to solitude. Houses sit separated by miles of wilderness, and during the winter months, the silence can be so profound that the sound of a single car engine carries for great distances. It was this silence that was broken around 7:30 p.m. when Faith Westman, a local resident, heard the unmistakable sound of a car accident directly outside her home on Wild Ammonoosuc Road. Looking out her window, Faith could see a dark-colored sedan that had clearly left the roadway and struck a cluster of trees. The vehicle was facing the wrong direction, suggesting it had either spun out or been turned around during the impact. Steam was rising from the damaged hood, and in the gathering darkness she could make out the silhouette of someone near the driver's side of the car. Concerned for the occupant's safety and well-being, Faith immediately called 911 to report the accident. Within minutes of Faith's call, another witness arrived at the scene. Butch Atwood, a local school bus driver who was returning home from his route, noticed the accident and pulled his bus over to offer assistance. Butch was a familiar figure in the community, known for his helpful nature and willingness to stop for stranded motorists during New Hampshire's harsh winter months. As he approached the damaged Saturn, he could see a young woman standing near the vehicle. The conversation that followed would become one of the most analyzed interactions in missing persons case history. Butch offered to help Maura, asking if she needed him to call the police or if she required any immediate assistance. According to Butch's later testimony, the young woman appeared uninjured but seemed agitated or nervous. She declined his offer of help, claiming that she had already called AAA for roadside assistance. However, Butch knew this was unlikely, if not impossible, because cell phone service in that particular area was notoriously poor, particularly during winter months when atmospheric conditions could make communication even more challenging. Something about the interaction troubled Butch. The woman's demeanor struck him as odd. Though he couldn't articulate exactly why, she appeared to want him to leave, asking him not to call the police. Despite her request, Butch's instincts told him that something wasn't right about the situation. After arriving at his home just a few minutes down the road, he made a second call to 911 at approximately 7:43 p.m., reporting the accident and expressing his concern about the stranded motorist. The response time for emergency services in rural New Hampshire can vary significantly depending on location and weather conditions. On this particular February evening, Haverhill police officer Cecil Smith arrived at the scene at exactly 7:46 p.m., just 3 minutes after Butch Atwood's call and approximately 16 minutes after Faith Westman's initial report. However, when Officer Smith stepped out of his patrol car and approached the damaged Saturn, he discovered something that would transform a routine traffic accident into one of New England's most perplexing mysteries. The woman was gone. Officer Smith conducted a thorough examination of the scene, his flashlight beam cutting through the winter darkness as he documented every detail of the abandoned vehicle. The black Saturn sedan had struck a tree with considerable force, severely damaging the left headlight and pushing the radiator into the cooling fan, rendering the vehicle inoperable. The windshield was cracked on the driver's side, and both airbags had deployed, indicating a significant impact. Most concerning was the fact that all doors to the vehicle were locked, suggesting that whoever had been driving had taken the time to secure the car before disappearing into the surrounding wilderness. Inside the vehicle, Officer Smith discovered a collection of items that would provide crucial clues while simultaneously deepening the mystery. Red stains that appeared to be wine were visible both inside and outside the car. On the rear seat, he found an empty beer bottle and a damaged box of Francia wine, consistent with the alcohol purchases Maura had made earlier that afternoon. Also inside the vehicle were an ATETA membership card issued to Maura Murray, blank accident report forms, winter gloves, compact discs, makeup, diamond jewelry, and handwritten directions to Burlington, Vermont. Perhaps most poignantly, Officer Smith discovered Maura's favorite stuffed animal and a book titled Not Without Peril, which detailed mountain climbing accidents in the White Mountains region. The book's presence would later fuel speculation about Maura's intentions and mental state at the time of her disappearance. Missing from the vehicle were Maura's debit card, credit cards, cell phone, and some of the liquor bottles she had purchased. These items have never been recovered, and none of the cards or phone have shown any activity since the night of February 9, 2004. When police traced the vehicle's registration, they discovered it belonged to Fred Murray, a respected handyman and former military man from Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Fred's daughter Maura was listed as an authorized driver, but when contacted, Fred was as bewildered as everyone else about why his daughter would be driving alone through rural New Hampshire on a Monday evening in February. The family had no knowledge of any plans Maura might have had to travel to New Hampshire, and her sudden absence from the university had caught even her closest friends and professors off guard. The initial police response treated Maura's disappearance as a potential voluntary missing person case. This decision was based on several factors, including her apparent travel preparations, the fabricated story about a family death, and the absence of any obvious evidence of foul play at the accident scene. However, this interpretation would prove increasingly problematic as more details about Maura's character and circumstances emerged. Friends and family insisted that despite any personal struggles she might have been experiencing, simply vanishing without a trace was completely out of character for someone as responsible and communicative as Maura had always been. The search for Maura Murray began in earnest the following morning, February 10, 2004. Fred Murray received a voicemail at 3:20 p.m. informing him that his daughter's car had been found abandoned, but he was working out of state and didn't receive the message until later. At 5:00 p.m., one of Maura's older sisters contacted their father with the devastating news. Fred immediately called Haverhill police and was told that if Maura was not reported safe by the following morning, the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department would initiate a formal search operation. Fred Murray arrived in Haverhill before dawn on February 11th, bringing with him the desperate energy of a father whose child had vanished without explanation. At 8 a.m., the first organized search began, involving Maura's family members, New Hampshire Fish and Game personnel, local volunteers and trained search dogs. The operation focused on the dense wilderness surrounding the crash site, with particular attention paid to the numerous hiking trails, abandoned logging roads, and remote cabins that dotted the mountainous terrain. One of the most significant developments during the initial search occurred when a tracking dog picked up Maura's scent from one of her gloves. The dog followed the trail approximately 100 yards east from where the vehicle had been discovered before losing the scent entirely. This crucial piece of evidence suggested to investigators that Maura had left the immediate crash site on foot, but had then likely entered another vehicle, effectively erasing her trail in the vast New Hampshire wilderness. The timing of this scent trail raised important questions about the sequence of events following the accident. If Maura had walked 100 yards east before getting into another car, it meant she had remained in the area for at least several minutes after Butch Atwood's departure, but before Officer Smith's arrival. This narrow window of time, perhaps no more than 10 to 15 minutes, became critical to understanding what had happened to the missing nursing student. At 5:00 p.m. on February 11th, Maura's boyfriend Billy Rausch and his parents arrived in Haverhill. Billy was serving in the army at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and had traveled across the country as soon as he learned of Maura's disappearance. Police immediately separated Billy from his parents and conducted a lengthy private interrogation, followed by a joint questioning session. Billy's alibi was solid. He had been on military duty hundreds of miles away when Maura disappeared, but investigators wanted to understand the dynamics of their relationship and whether any personal issues might have contributed to Maura's decision to drive to New Hampshire. During the investigation of Billy's potential connection to the case, a disturbing piece of evidence emerged. Billy's cell phone had been turned off during his flight to New Hampshire, which was not unusual given airline regulations at the time. However, at some point during the journey, he had received a voicemail that he described as the sound of someone sobbing. The call was eventually traced to a calling card issued to the American Red Cross, but the origin and purpose of the call was never definitively determined. Some investigators theorized that it might have been Maura trying to reach Billy in her final moments of distress, while others dismissed it as coincidental or unrelated to the case. The family's anguish was compounded by what they perceived as a lack of urgency from local authorities. While police maintained that they were treating Maura's disappearance seriously, Fred Murray and his family felt that crucial time was being wasted while investigators pursued the theory that Maura had voluntarily disappeared. On February 12th, Fred and Billy held an evening press conference in Bethlehem, New Hampshire, pleading with the public for any information about Maura's whereabouts and challenging the assumption that she had simply run away. The first press coverage of Maura's disappearance was published on February 13, 2004, introducing her story to a wider audience and generating the first wave of tips and potential sightings. However, the police report released at this time contained a detail that would prove controversial and long-lasting. According to the report, police believed Maura was intoxicated at the time of the crash, despite Butch Atwood's testimony that she had not appeared impaired during their brief interaction. This discrepancy would become one of many disputed facts that would fuel conspiracy theories and amateur investigations for decades to come. By February 19th, exactly 1 week after Maura's disappearance, the case had attracted national attention. Fred Murray and Billy Rausch were interviewed on CNN's American Morning, using the platform to expand their plea for information and to challenge law enforcement's handling of the investigation. The family had begun conducting their own search operations, extending their efforts into Vermont after learning that authorities there had not been properly notified of Maura's disappearance, despite her apparent interest in traveling to that state. The involvement of federal authorities came 10 days after Maura's disappearance, when the FBI joined the investigation. While missing persons cases typically remain under local and state jurisdiction, the FBI's entry suggested that investigators had identified potential interstate elements or other factors that warranted federal attention. The FBI began interviewing relatives throughout Massachusetts, and the Haverhill police chief announced that the search had become nationwide in scope. On February 19th, New Hampshire Fish and Game conducted a second comprehensive ground and air search operation. This effort involved helicopter surveillance with thermal imaging cameras, additional tracking dogs, and cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains. The search covered thousands of acres of wilderness surrounding the crash site, focusing on areas where someone might seek shelter or where a body might have been concealed. Despite the extensive effort and advanced technology, no trace of Maura Murray was discovered. One of the most emotionally charged moments in the early investigation occurred on February 26th, when Maura's older sister Julie discovered a pair of torn white women's underwear lying in the snow along a secluded trail near French Pond Road. The discovery sent shockwaves through the family and investigating team as it raised the terrifying possibility that Maura had been the victim of a sexual assault. However, subsequent DNA testing revealed that the underwear did not belong to Maura, adding another layer of confusion to an already complex case. As winter turned to spring and spring to summer, the search for Maura Murray continued with diminishing intensity but unwavering determination from her family. Fred Murray became a fixture in the White Mountains region, spending countless hours hiking remote trails, interviewing local residents, and following up on tips and potential sightings. His dedication to finding his daughter was absolute, even as the official investigation began to shift toward other priorities. The case took on new dimensions as it attracted attention from amateur investigators, true crime enthusiasts, and online communities dedicated to solving cold cases. Internet forums devoted to Maura's disappearance began generating theories that ranged from plausible to wildly speculative. Some focused on the possibility of foul play by local residents. Others explored potential connections to serial killers known to have operated in the region. And still others maintained that Maura had successfully disappeared voluntarily and was living under an assumed identity somewhere in North America. The anniversary of Maura's disappearance became an annual pilgrimage for her family and supporters. Each February 9th brought renewed media attention, updated age progression photographs, and fresh appeals for information from the public. Fred Murray aged visibly with each passing year, the weight of unanswered questions and persistent hope etched deep into his weathered features. He spoke frequently at conferences devoted to missing persons cases, sharing his expertise and advocating for improved coordination between law enforcement agencies. Local residents of Haverhill and surrounding communities found themselves unwilling participants in one of New England's most famous mysteries. Some embraced their role as witnesses to history, granting interviews to documentary filmmakers and journalists who made regular pilgrimages to Route 112. Others grew weary of the constant attention, particularly when amateur investigators began knocking on doors and trespassing on private property in search of clues that professional searchers might have missed. The case evolved in 2009, when the New Hampshire Attorney General's office transferred Maura's file to the state's Cold Case Division. This transition marked a significant shift in how authorities viewed her disappearance. Rather than treating it as a voluntary missing persons case, investigators now classified it as suspicious, acknowledging the possibility that Maura had been the victim of foul play. However, this reclassification did not immediately generate new leads or evidence that might explain what had happened to the missing nursing student. As the years passed, technological advances brought new tools to the investigation. Cell phone tower analysis revealed the general path of Maura's journey from Massachusetts to New Hampshire, confirming that she had traveled alone and had not made any calls during the drive. Credit card records and ATM surveillance footage provided a detailed timeline of her activities on February 9th, but offered no clues about her ultimate destination or the reasons behind her mysterious trip north. The emergence of social media platforms created new avenues for information sharing and speculation about Maura's fate. Facebook groups and Reddit communities devoted to her case generated thousands of posts analyzing every known detail of her disappearance. Some of these online investigations produced legitimate leads that were forwarded to law enforcement, while others descended into unfounded conspiracy theories that complicated the official investigation. In 2017, the Oxygen Network premiered a documentary series called The Disappearance of Maura Murray, which described her case as the first crime mystery of the social media age. The series brought unprecedented attention to Maura's story, interviewing key witnesses, family members, and investigators while exploring various theories about what might have happened to her. However, the documentary also highlighted the challenges posed by decades of speculation and misinformation that had accumulated around the case. The impact on Maura's family was profound and long-lasting. Fred Murray became a nationally recognized advocate for missing persons' families, but the cost of his dedication was measured in broken relationships, financial hardship, and the slow erosion of hope. Maura's siblings struggled to maintain normal lives while living under the shadow of their sister's disappearance. Some family members eventually chose to step away from the active search, while others remained committed to finding answers regardless of the personal cost. Professional investigators who worked on Maura's case described it as one of the most frustrating mysteries they had ever encountered. The absence of witnesses, physical evidence, or electronic trails after 7:46 p.m. on February 9, 2004, created an investigative dead end that has persisted for more than 2 decades. Despite numerous leads, alleged sightings, and extensive searches, no definitive evidence has ever been discovered to explain what happened to Maura Murray after she vanished from that lonely stretch of Route 112. The case has generated numerous theories about Maura's fate, each supported by different interpretations of the available evidence. Some investigators believe she died from exposure after becoming lost in the New Hampshire wilderness, pointing to the harsh weather conditions and her apparent unfamiliarity with the terrain. Others theorize that she was picked up by a passing motorist who either helped her escape her previous life or became her killer. A third group maintains that Maura planned her disappearance in advance and successfully created a new identity, though this theory struggles to explain why she would abandon her family without any subsequent contact. Local residents developed their own theories based on their knowledge of the area and its inhabitants. Some pointed to seasonal workers who traveled through the region and might have encountered Maura at the crash site. Others suspected local residents with criminal histories or known substance abuse problems. A few theorized that Maura might have been picked up by someone she knew, perhaps a friend or acquaintance whose connection to her had not been discovered by investigators. The role of potential serial killers in the region became a subject of particular interest as the case aged. Investigators examined the activities of several known criminals who had operated in New England during 2004, looking for any connections to Maura's disappearance. While some superficial similarities were identified, no definitive links were ever established that would justify classifying Maura as the victim of a serial killer. The psychological aspects of Maura's case attracted attention from forensic psychologists and behavioral analysts who attempted to understand her mindset on February 9, 2004. Her pattern of behavior that day, including the fabricated family emergency, the alcohol purchases, and the apparent planning for an extended absence, suggested someone who was experiencing significant stress or emotional turmoil. However, friends and family insisted that while Maura faced normal college-age pressures and relationship challenges, nothing in her background suggested she was contemplating suicide or permanent escape from her life. The academic community at the University of Massachusetts Amherst struggled to understand how one of their most promising nursing students could simply vanish without a trace. Maura's professors described her as dedicated and conscientious, someone who took her studies seriously and maintained regular communication about her academic progress. Her sudden departure from campus and the false explanation she provided were completely out of character based on her previous behavior. The military community at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where Billy Rausch was stationed, also found themselves drawn into the investigation. Military investigators reviewed Billy's activities and communications in the days leading up to Maura's disappearance, looking for any evidence that relationship problems might have triggered her decision to drive to New Hampshire. While the relationship had experienced normal tensions associated with long-distance dating and military deployment, no evidence was found to suggest that Billy had any involvement in Maura's disappearance. The legal system in New Hampshire adapted to handle the unique challenges posed by Maura's case. The state implemented new protocols for missing persons investigations, particularly those involving young adults who might be classified as voluntary missing persons. These changes were designed to prevent the kind of delayed response that had characterized the initial hours of Maura's disappearance, when valuable time was lost while authorities debated whether she had left voluntarily. The economic impact of Maura's case on the local community was significant and long-lasting. Tourism related to her disappearance brought visitors to the region, some of whom spent money on hotels, restaurants, and local businesses. However, the constant presence of investigators, reporters, and amateur sleuths also created challenges for residents who valued their privacy and the area's traditional tranquility. The evolution of media coverage over the decades reflected changing attitudes toward missing persons cases and the role of public participation in investigations. Early coverage focused primarily on the basic facts of Maura's disappearance and appeals for information. As the case aged, media attention shifted toward more speculative content, including detailed analysis of evidence, interviews with alleged psychics, and exploration of conspiracy theories. The technological revolution that occurred during the years following Maura's disappearance highlighted how different her case might have been if it had occurred just a few years later. The proliferation of cell phone towers, GPS tracking, social media platforms, and surveillance cameras would have provided investigators with a much richer source of evidence about her activities and movements. The absence of these tools in 2004 created information gaps that have never been filled. The impact on search and rescue operations in New Hampshire was substantial, as Maura's case highlighted both the strengths and limitations of existing protocols. The state invested in additional training, equipment, and coordination systems designed to improve response times and effectiveness in remote areas. However, the vast wilderness regions of New Hampshire continue to pose significant challenges for searchers attempting to locate missing persons. Today, more than 20 years after Maura Murray disappeared from Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, her case remains one of the most discussed and analyzed missing persons mysteries in American history. Her family continues to search for answers. Law enforcement maintains an active investigation, and thousands of amateur investigators worldwide continue to examine every known detail of her disappearance. The passage of time has not diminished the public fascination with her story or the determination of those who believe that the truth about what happened to Maura Murray on that cold February night is still waiting to be discovered. The legacy of Maura's case extends far beyond the borders of New Hampshire, influencing how missing persons investigations are conducted, how families advocate for their loved ones, and how the public engages with unsolved mysteries in the digital age. Her disappearance occurred at the dawn of the social media era, making her story one of the first missing persons cases to be extensively documented and discussed online. This digital dimension has both helped and hindered the investigation, generating valuable tips and maintaining public awareness while also spreading misinformation and unfounded theories. The question of what happened to Maura Murray after she vanished from the crash site on Route 112 continues to haunt everyone who has been touched by her story. Whether she died from exposure in the New Hampshire wilderness, was the victim of foul play, or somehow managed to disappear voluntarily and create a new life remains unknown. What is certain is that her disappearance has left an indelible mark on her family, her community, and the countless individuals who have dedicated their time and energy to searching for the truth about what happened to a 21-year-old nursing student who simply vanished into the night, leaving behind only questions that may never be answered.